I'm really interested in what Suella Braverman is doing, partly because I think she's wrong, and partly because I also think she believes she's justified in what she's doing, and therefore she needs to be challenged at the very top level. She needs to be challenged intellectually, if she possibly can be. I'm not really the person I fear to be quoting statistics at her, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try a little bit because I think it's necessary. And when you look at the fundamental statistic is very simple. The majority of those refugees, or those potential refugees, those immigrants who are travelling across the channel by boat, by small dinghies, have done deals often in Istanbul, and they represent only 10 different nationalities. People from Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, Iraq, Sudan, Vietnam, Kuwait, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Yemen. And all of those countries are countries that have clearly got human rights problems, that have clearly got issues with abuse. And 98% of the people who come here on those small boats appeal for asylum, and 61% of those are found on the first reading to be genuine. Now, and now we get to the interesting statistics, because Priti Patel, in her last testimony to the committee looking into this, claimed that 70% of the people who travelled across the channel in small boats were economic migrants and therefore illegal on her criteria. It simply doesn't stack up. Why? Because they were young men. And actually that doesn't make any sense. Now, she and now more recently Suella Braverman want people instead to apply through her Nationality and Borders Act 22. They want people to apply through this safe route. Now this gives the impression there's a series of safe roads that people can go through. No, there's actually not. There are 3 sort of temporary visa routes which people can go through. And of those 3, the first one, the family reunion, has pretty well been closed down by the Nationality and Borders Act 2022. So there's actually only 2 safe routes that people can use. That is the refugee resettlement program and humanitarian visas. So that's a very, very small window of opportunity. Now, what is very interesting, then looking at this a little bit further, is the Refugee Council has said that those coming by boat are more likely to be genuine than those coming to the UK by more safer routes. And that, I think, is pretty damning, because the whole ethic of the Patel-Braverman argument is that those people who are risking their lives in the channel are dodgy. And the problem is made slightly worse by the new wave of Albanian migrants who are coming across. Now, the Albanians caused a problem with migration in Germany and then in France, and now they've moved on to Britain. But 50% of those who applied for asylum have been granted it automatically. Again, the statistics do not point to the idea that this is a huge wave of illegal migrants. But more than that, Edi Rama in Albania, the Premier of Albania, says that he's aware that there's a number of illegal migrants coming across, or there's a number of dodgy people coming across to enter the UK through the channel. Now, of course, if you want to enter the UK as an Albanian, you can use the Schengen pass and come via Dublin. There's actually a very clear route if you want to do that. So there's very little reason for a dodgy Albanian to cross into Britain via the Channel. It makes very little sense. So a lot of this, I think, is simply propaganda. And of course, the Russian trolls who follow me will be immediately entertained by the fact that I'm suggesting there's propaganda going on in the UK as well as in Russia. Of course there is. Propaganda is simply a way that people put forward and twist the facts to suit their political ideology, and there's definitely a political ideology here. And it's not specifically a right-wing ideology or a left-wing ideology. And here again I'm going to shock. Because Liz Truss said today in her speech that the Labour Party didn't have a plan for dealing with immigration. Well, it does actually. It does. Sir Keir Starmer pointed out that he wanted to impose a points-based Australian system. So he may not be specifically referencing what the Conservatives call illegal immigration, but he's definitely referencing an attempt to pull back routine immigration. In fact, he's using exactly the same terminology and exactly the same ultimate plan which the Conservatives are proposing. So to say Sir Keir is not up to this, to say Sir Keir is not doing this, is to misjudge Sir Keir. Sir Keir is also on the same wavelength. I happen to think this wavelength is wrong, but it's significantly less wrong when you're looking at people who are simply coming here to find a new life. When you're looking at people who are claiming asylum, that is a different matter entirely, because if this claim is right, then they must be granted asylum under the 1951 Refugee Convention that we are signatories to. And indeed, a lot of Suella Braverman's proposals are in defiance of the United Nations Convention itself. How you reach a country is actually irrelevant to the asylum application. And the idea of appealing for asylum in the first safe country that you reach, i.e. France, for example, harks back to the Lisbon Treaty that we are no longer signatories to. We left that when we left Brexit. So the idea of a first safe country is about the European community. It's not about us. So we can't talk about a first safe country and expect France to pick up the pieces. It's simply not reasonable and wrong and playing games. So legal routes, as I say, to come to the UK, legal routes are rare and tiny and being reduced by the legislation already put forward by Priti Patel. And what Suella Braverman is proposing already makes the Palermo Protocol and the Convention on Transnational Trafficking and Organised Crime, it already makes that look ridiculous. She makes a great point about her own background. She talks about this being an intensely personal campaign, and she talks about how her family came through a legal route and how they integrated thoroughly into British society. Well, they were lucky. They were very lucky, because had they left it a week or so later, as simple as that, had they left it a few weeks later, they wouldn't have got in at all, because James Callaghan, the then Home Secretary, ran through one of the most racist laws that I think we've ever enacted, called the Commonwealth Immigration Act, and that prevented a lot of people from getting out of Africa. It was targeted specifically at the Kenyan Asian community, and it made it harder for them to get into the UK. So the fact that Suella Braverman describes her own family's experience of migration to curry favour is itself deceptive. It actually exposes her hypocrisy. And more than that, she was an insider. She was an immigration lawyer herself until 2015. So it all stinks. It stinks to high heaven. What is her aim? She says her aim is to allow migration that grows our economy. Well, at least she admits that migration grows our economy. She's got two proposals. Number one, she wants to deter all asylum applications, I think, unless people who are applying have professional qualifications or cash. So I suppose oligarchs would be in, and somebody who's been severely abused in an Iraqi jail would be out. Number two, she only wants people who are economically necessary. So migration is there to fill our needs. We might as well reintroduce slavery. And I say, Keir Starmer equally seems to go down a parallel path. Jobs need to be filled. We'll get foreigners to do it. So Braverman also follows Theresa May. And one of the reasons that I didn't pursue a political career in the House of Commons was precisely because I didn't like this policy, and I've known about it for some time. In fact, I protested about it. I actually went to see these people, and they tried talking down to me. I didn't like that. So Theresa May made it incredibly difficult for students to stay here and complete their studies. She put all manner of silly little hurdles in the way because students are well documented. And so if you have a policy which is going to reward the Home Office for the number of people that it excludes, students are a great target audience, a great target minority because they are fully documented. So if you can find a few students and throw them out, then you've done your quota for that month. Braverman talks about students bringing in their families. Well, actually, it's a very small number, and only postgraduates can bring in their families. So again, she over-eggs this omelette. I think last year it was 80,000 altogether. And she characterises these people, she further characterises these people as unskilled workers. This is just a little bit rich, really. So at every single level of this, it is very dodgy. As for the Rwanda option, it's got very little to do whether it's Rwanda or whether it's a back street in Madrid. And of course, you remember there's 11 Syrians who were dumped in a back street in Madrid by the Home Office. It doesn't matter where we dump them. What we're actually saying is that we're not prepared to do the job that we have undertaken in 1951 to do. We are subcontracting our responsibility. And that is the fundamental issue at stake. That we are not prepared to take our responsibility to deal with refugees, to consider our hospitality seriously. And if we're not prepared to take our responsibility seriously, why should we expect others to take their responsibility seriously? Why should we expect people to identify with our nation that treats them with so much contempt? We need to seriously rethink our position in the world because it's changing. And whether or not we are, in fact, a positive influence, I like to think we are. But I think if some of these proposals are fully enacted, we will start to look very shoddy indeed. And I wouldn't like that.